There's a war going on inside American conservatism right now, and most people don't even know they're in the crossfire. On one side, you've got traditional conservatives who are pro freedom, pro Israel, pro American, people who believe this country is worth defending, and that freedom costs something. On the other side, you've got what I'm calling the black pill right. And before you dismiss this as some fringe thing, understand some of the biggest names in conservative media have swallowed it whole. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, Douglas McGregor, Scott Ritter, and a whole lot more. These voices have massive audiences, and they're feeding those audiences a worldview that, when you trace it back to its source, sounds a whole lot like something written in Moscow, Tehran, or Doha. All right, so Musk, Zuckerberg, and Bezos all have something in common. I mean, besides all showing up in the same uncomfortable court documents, they're secretly pouring millions into underground bunkers and then stuffing them with gourmet freeze-dried food. I'm not talking about ramen and Vienna sausages here. These are men who own private islands and personal submarines and have more ex-wives than I've got fingers, and they're hoarding a 30-year food supply like the world's worst coupon shoppers. When the guys who built the Matrix start prepping like they know how it ends, maybe the rest of us should take a hint. Now, I don't have a $50 million bunker. I've got a passport and questionable life choices. But I do have a brain, which is why I was happy to get hooked up with freeze-dry wholesalers to get the same high-quality, U.S.-raised, actually delicious freeze-dried food the top 1% are filling their bunkers with, except without the billionaire budget. We're talking grass-fed burgers, ribeye, sirloin steaks, scrambled eggs, pizza, sushi, and yes, Hostess cupcakes, because if civilization collapses, I'm absolutely still having dessert. Over 300 meals, 30 plus year shelf life, sealed in Mylar bags like some kind of beautiful apocalypse time capsule. So stop blowing your prep budget on chalky MREs that taste like cardboard soaked in sadness and bad decisions. When things go sideways, food morale matters. So go to freezedrywholesalers.com/hotzone or click the link in the description and use code HOTZONE for 15% off. The elites are already ready. The only question is whether you are. So what exactly is the black pill? It goes by a few different names. Some call it the doomer right, the nihilistic, pessimistic wing of the conservatives who believe nothing can be fixed, elections don't matter, and institutions are beyond saving. Some call it the Groyper right, after Nick Fuentes' meme-driven white nationalist rhetoric and his following that dresses up its anti-Semitism in Christian nationalist language. Some call it America First isolationism, which used to mean Pat Buchanan's principled restraint, but it's kind of mutated into something that's actively pro-Russia, anti-NATO, and friendly to America's enemies. It's a movement that has decided the system is too far gone to bother fixing through legitimate means. And you may have felt this yourself. Whatever you call it, the core belief is just the same. America is irredeemably corrupt, controlled by shadowy forces, Zionists, globalists, whatever they're calling it this week. And the only honest move is to burn it all down. Does that sound familiar? Well, it should, because this is also the official position of Vladimir Putin, the Ayatollah Khamenei, and the Chinese Communist Party, among others. Not a coincidence. Now, let me walk you through what we actually know. This is not speculation. These are documented facts. In September of 2024, the Department of Justice indicted 2 employees of the Russian state media outlet RT for funneling nearly $10 million through a front company called Tenet Media to pay American conservative influencers with millions of followers to produce content favorable to Russian interests. The company's own founders knew exactly where the money came from. RT's editor-in-chief later bragged on Russian state television about running what she called guerrilla projects inside the United States. $10 million. to produce content for American conservative audiences like Tim Pool. That's not a theory, that's a federal indictment. A leaked Kremlin media manual from 2022 specifically named Tucker Carlson, the only Western journalist who was singled out by name, and instructed Russian state media to broadcast his segments as often as possible around their country. Now, Russian state television did exactly that, and they rebroadcast his material regularly to domestic Russian audiences. The Institute for Strategic Dialogue summed it up this way: Carlson isn't valuable because Russia controls him. He's valuable because he's selling the same product they are. Then in February 2024, Carlson flew to Moscow and handed Vladimir Putin, a man who was at that moment shelling Ukrainian cities, a 2-hour primetime interview, totally softball, arranged by the Kremlin with essentially no pushback on anything Putin said. He then toured a Moscow grocery store and marveled at just how cheap the food was.
You know, Russia is famous for its bread. Oh, come on.
Russian state media had a field day with that. Now, Douglas McGregor has a genuine and impressive war record. We got to get that out of the way. He commanded the armor at the Battle of 73 Easting in the Gulf War, and it was extraordinary by any measure. But somewhere along the way, his commentary sort of crossed a line. 3 days after Russia's full invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, he went on Fox and declared the battle essentially over. Ukraine would surrender within 24 hours, he said. That was more than 3 years ago, and Ukraine's still fighting. Now, he claimed that Ukraine's military casualties at that time had reached 400,000 dead. U.S. officials estimate the figure was closer to 70,000. Russian state television broadcast his analysis to domestic audiences as the validation that the war was going Russia's way, which means the war continued because of him. Same with Scott Ritter. He confirmed in his own published writing that he'd been paid as a contractor for RT since April of 2020 and produced hundreds of videos for Russian television. He traveled to Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory and met with collaborationist officials under Russian military intelligence escort.
Наш солдат. Я знаю ваши истории. Я знаю, вы героем Мариуполь. Я знаю, вы героем Луганск, Донецк, Херсон, Запорожье. Я знаю.
He called the Bucha massacre, which I witnessed the aftermath of, and it was documented by satellite imagery and Human Rights Watch and survivors' testimony. He called it a staged provocation. He described Hamas's October 7th attack as an impressive military operation. The FBI raided his home in August 2024 as part of an investigation into him being a foreign agent, and they removed more than 24 boxes of materials from his house. Now, these aren't fringe figures operating on the margins. They're being amplified to audiences in the millions, twice the size of Anderson Cooper's audience. Then there's Ben Swan. Now, you might not know his name as well as the others, but you've almost certainly seen his content pass through your feed. He's a former Emmy-winning local news anchor who was fired by CBS in Atlanta in 2018. He was promoting Pizzagate and Sandy Hook conspiracy theories on the air, and so that's why they fired him. He relaunched as an independent journalist under the banner Truth in Media and was selling himself as the guy who was willing to say what the mainstream media won't. What he didn't advertise was that he was simultaneously running a company called Rebel Media, which is registered with the Department of Justice as a foreign agent working for, guess who? TV Novosti. TV Novosti is the parent company of RT. It's owned by the Russian government. Now, the registration is public record. According to the FARA filings that were reviewed by the Associated Press and Open Secrets, Rebel Media Productions collected more than $6 million from RT-related entities in just under 2 years. Swan's own filings show he received $420,000 a year just for overseeing the production on top of per-episode payments. He claims the Russian-funded content was produced for other markets, in China, India, South America, etc., and that his American audience work is kept entirely separate. But the AP found the same guests, the same themes, the same narratives in all of his content. So, traveling between both operations in April 2024, right as Congress was debating the Ukraine aid package, Swan released a 12-part documentary series called Zelensky Unmasked, and it portrayed the president of Ukraine as a corrupt dictator. The war is all NATO's fault. He argued that U.S. aid was being wasted, and this was all promoted by Donald Trump Jr. and other conservative influencers with a combined following of 33 million people. It was amplified all across X. It went massively viral. It was built on the foundation of Russian government money, timed perfectly to poison the congressional debate. And unlike tenant media influencers who claim they were deceived, Swan can't make that argument. He registered the foreign agent relationship himself. He's worked for the Russian state media on and off since 2013. And in February of last year, he just simply stopped filing the required FARA disclosures, even as his company kept producing RT content. Now, this is what the pipeline looks like up close. It's not always shadowy and covert. Sometimes it's right there in the Department of Justice filings in plain sight. And the content still spreads to millions of Americans who have no idea who paid for it. But you know who paid for it? Russia, China. These aren't fringe figures that are operating in the margins. They're being amplified to audiences in the millions. Now, let's talk about the money surrounding this administration's own foreign policy team. It gets worse, unfortunately. Steve Witkoff is Trump's special envoy for peace missions. No Senate confirmation, no government salary, and he's got financial entanglements coming out of his ears. That should concern every serious American, regardless of party. Qatar's sovereign wealth fund purchased his Park Lane hotel for over $600 million. At the same time, his sons were simultaneously pitching a $4 billion real estate fund to the sovereign wealth funds in Qatar. Those are the very governments their father was negotiating with on behalf of the United States. His closest business partner was sanctioned by Ukraine for ties to Kremlin-linked oligarchs, which is why he likes Russia so much. A call between Kremlin officials that got leaked and published by Bloomberg revealed Russian negotiators believed the peace framework being passed through Witkoff would end up very close to Russia's own preferred version. A Republican Congressman, Don Bacon, put it plainly and said that Witkoff favors the Russians and cannot be trusted. Then there's Tom Barak, now Trump's ambassador to Turkey and special envoy for Syria and special envoy for Iraq. He was prosecuted for acting as an unregistered agent of the UAE while serving inside the Trump White House. The conduct described at trial, whether or not it met the legal threshold for conviction, included sharing of advanced drafts of campaign speeches with the UAE and receiving hundreds of millions in UAE sovereign wealth fund investment right after going to work for Trump. He now holds 3 simultaneous diplomatic posts. Like I said, covers Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, all regions where the UAE, Qatar, and Russia have enormous strategic interests. This is who is shaping American foreign policy. People with 9-figure financial entanglements with the very governments they're supposed to be negotiating with. This is a problem. Now, I want to take on the core lies that the black pill right is pushing, because your friends and family are hearing these, and probably are you as well. And they deserve a straight answer. So lie number 1, Ukraine doesn't deserve American support. It's an endless money pit that has nothing to do with us. Well, here's the reality. Russia's unprovoked invasion of a sovereign democratic nation next door threatens the post-World War II order that has kept great powers from fighting each other for 80 years. U.S. aid to Ukraine has consisted largely of weapons drawn from existing military stockpiles, not freshly printed cash. It represents a fraction of a percent of the federal budget. And what it has accomplished is the degradation of Russia's military capacity, the deterrence of Chinese adventurism, toward Taiwan and the protection of NATO allies who are directly in Putin's crosshairs. Traditional conservatives armed Afghan fighters against Soviet forces in the 1980s because they understood that proxy containment is cheaper than fighting Russia directly on NATO soil. The isolationist position on Ukraine doesn't come from conservative tradition. It echoes Russian propaganda and the radical left's No More Wars campus activism almost word for word. Now, lie number 2. Israel provoked October 7th, and Zionists are globalists that are pulling the strings. Hamas, funded and directed by Qatar and Iran, massacred 1,200 people on October 7th. They burned families alive. They beheaded people. They raped women. I saw much of this after I got there 2 days later. Hamas itself published a detailed document that claimed full credit for the operation and described it as a military success. Israel's own intelligence service, the Shin Bet, conducted an investigation and concluded it was a catastrophic intelligence failure. Israel's spy chief took personal responsibility and called it the worst failure in the agency's history when he stepped down. The idea that Israel engineered the murder of its own people is not a heterodox opinion. It's terrorist propaganda, recycled through black-pilled channels and dressed up as truth-telling. And the word Zionist deserves a direct answer. Zionism is simply the belief that the Jewish people have a right to a homeland in Israel. That's their native land. Every American president from Truman to Trump has held that position. But in black pill usage, Zionist has become a denigrating code word for what globalist used to mean, which is what cosmopolitan meant when Soviet propagandists used it in the 1940s. You hear the term ZOG, which stands for Zionist Occupied Government. It originated in neo-Nazi literature in the 1970s. It's now appealing to mainstream conservative commentary. That didn't happen by accident. It's ancient anti-Semitism dressed up, wearing new clothes. And listen, Scripture's clear. Those who curse Abraham's descendants do not come out ahead. We should all think about that. Lie number 3, the Epstein files prove a Jewish cabal is running American foreign policy, worshiping Baal, and elite wickedness is the real problem. Well, elite wickedness is real. The Epstein network was real, and the people connected to it deserve accountability regardless of their background or political affiliation. But the black pill response to filter the entire scandal through an ethnic lens to obsess over Jewish names while ignoring everybody else is not a search for justice. It's a classic anti-Semitism that uses a real scandal as a delivery mechanism. Real conservatism demands moral renewal and accountability across the board. It doesn't require blaming a people group to make the corruption feel coherent. Lie number 4, America first means America only. Pull out of NATO, cut Israel loose, stop playing global policeman. Listen, American hegemony has delivered roughly 80 years without a single major power war. The alliances people in this movement want to dissolve, NATO, the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, the partnership with Israel, were built at enormous cost and have produced an era of relative stability that no previous period of human history can match. Israel alone shares intelligence, battlefield-tested technology, and operational experience that makes the American military more capable. The suggestion that abandoning these relationships makes America stronger is the same argument that Russia and China are making, because it's in Russia and China's direct best interest for America to make those choices. And the dire predictions that striking Iran's nuclear program would cause $30 gasoline, that was Tucker Carlson, thousands of American deaths, also Tucker, and World War III, those predictions came from the same voices, and they were all wrong. These positions don't represent a new kind of conservatism. They mirror the radical left's anti-Americanism and the BDS movement's anti-Israel activism, but they just wear MAGA hats doing it. They weaken deterrence, They fracture the Reagan coalition, and they serve the interests of people who want to see America diminished. Now, I want to talk about how good people end up here, because I've watched it happen to people that I respect. And I understand that the pandemic broke something in a lot of conservative Americans. I understand it because it broke something in me too. The lies about the jab, the lockdowns that destroyed businesses and children's mental health while doing essentially nothing to stop the spread. And the draconian measures that were taken in Australia and Canada and Europe and places like that felt less like public health and more like a rehearsal for something worse. Even Israel's aggressive mandate program, which was one of the harshest in the world and forced things on people who didn't want them, all of that was real. And the anger about it was totally justified. But here's what America's enemies understood that most of us didn't. A man full of justified rage, whose trust in institutions has collapsed, is a man who's ready to believe anything. And they were ready with the next thing to believe. Once you've accepted that your own government lied to you about, the sickness, and it did, the next question is, what else are they lying about? That's where the algorithms take over, and the Telegram channels, and the foreign-funded content farms. And before long, you're watching Scott Ritter explain that Bucha was staged, and you're nodding along because at least somebody's telling you what the establishment doesn't want you to hear. The sensation of forbidden truth is very powerful, and it's exactly what adversarial information operations are designed to produce. The Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy about people who are taken captive by the devil to do his will. And he wasn't describing cartoon villains. He was describing sincere, well-meaning people who get turned around so completely that they end up serving the opposite of everything they thought they stood for. That's the black pill right. It thinks it's being anti-establishment. It is being extremely useful to the establishment in Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran. It thinks it's putting America first, but it's actually working to gut the very alliances and institutions that make America capable of projecting power and protecting Americans. The black pillars think they're speaking the forbidden truths about shadowy global control, but they're actually recycling propaganda that was originally designed for illiterate peasants in the 19th century Tsarist Russia. Proverbs says there's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. And I have friends who are deep into this. Good people, patriotic people, friends, people who genuinely love this country and are furious about what's being done to it. I'm not calling them stupid. I'm calling them captured. The bait was real. The institutional corruption is real. The lies about the pandemic were real. The concern about foreign influence in American policy is real. But the conclusion that they were led to, that the answer is to align with Russia and Iran and abandon Israel, to use neo-Nazi vocabulary while calling yourself a Christian nationalist, that conclusion is poison. And the people selling it are not their friends. Traditional conservatism knows what it believes. It believes American strength is the guarantor of global freedom. Not because America's perfect, but because the alternatives are catastrophically worse. It believes Israel is a strategic ally, a democracy in a region that has essentially none of those, a nation that shares our enemies and our values. It believes the alliances built after the last World War exist because Americans died to build them, and they are worth maintaining. It's skeptical of Russia and China and Iran, not because of any propaganda, but because of what those governments have demonstrably done to their own people and their neighbors and to us. Traditional conservatism does not think freedom is free. It doesn't think the world gets safer when America retreats. It doesn't think identifying scapegoats as a substitute for identifying enemies is a good idea. The black pill is not conservatism. It's conservatism hollowed out and refilled with despair, paranoia, and somebody else's agenda dressed up in American colors and sent out to do the work of America's enemies. Let me tell you, don't swallow it. All right, folks, that's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching The Hot Zone. I appreciate all of you. Please go to chuckholton.com if you'd like a written version of this, and you can share it with your friends. I hope you do. Take care.